Okay, so moving on to part 3 here of the first unit of DC US History 107, getting into the Gilded Age now, talking about massive American wealth and robber barons and captains of industry. One of the things that you will have to pick from on your essays this unit were John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie captains of industry or robber barons, and you will know what both of those terms mean here just in a little bit. So, kicking things off. Gilded Age, that is the era that we are now in. Moving into things that are kind of shiny on the outside and everything looks good because of the amount of wealth that we have, but underlying corruption and rottenness are within there. The term Gilded Age actually comes from Mark Twain, the famous author, and literally whenever he was interviewed about this, he said, we're living in a Gilded Age in which things look really good on the outside, but underneath with the workers and the amount of problems we have in society, we have a lot of corruption and a lot of rottenness. Okay? So, during this time period of the Gilded Age, American businessmen are going to become insanely wealthy. The wealthiest American and wealthiest, I guess, person in the world up to that period of time that is not a king or some sort of general is going to be John D. Rockefeller. We'll talk about him here in just a few minutes. And that is adjusting for inflation. You could take Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, combine their fortunes, you still would not have the amount that John D. Rockefeller had at that point in time. Now, the reason why wealth was so prevalent during this time period is because we go through a second industrial revolution, and industry is going to drive the American economy at this point in time. We're talking about the Civil War all the way up until right before World War I. The main things that we're focused on were steel, electricity, and oil. Each of those requires vast natural resources in order to accomplish and are going to advance the nation well into the 20th century. One of the more significant inventions that is going to change the way we communicate is going to be from Alexander Graham Bell, who is going to invent the telephone, which is going to transform the way we do business as well as personal lives. And eventually this was seen as a luxury, and eventually it's going to become a necessity. Okay. Now, with Alexander Graham Bell, he actually, while working with deaf students, developed the telephone. So, another inventor who also was hard of hearing, by the way, Thomas Edison, he is going to copy and improve several inventions. Now, Edison did have some original inventions that included the incandescent light bulb, in which he used cardboard in order to keep a bulb burning. But multiple inventions that he had, he actually took trips over to Europe, viewed things that they had, and copied down the ideas for these, came back to the United States, went to work in his lab, and created them. Pretty much an exact copy of it here, and then improved it so that way it would become something that the average consumer could have. Okay, things that he copied or invented included the phonograph, which is an early form of records. And there were, of course, audio recordings that he used on that. Motion picture, he actually made his own motion pictures as well as the camera for a period of time, and copied a very famous French film that involved or depicted a guy landing on the moon, or a group of people landing on the moon. That was originally made in France, but Edison made it an American film, and his version of it became more popular. And then also, like I mentioned before, he does not invent the light bulb, he just perfects it. Okay, and makes it to where it can become something that the average consumer can afford, and transforms life in pretty much everywhere with this invention. Okay, now, the other people during this era, you have to decide whether or not they are a robber baron or a captain of industry. Okay, each of them was a great businessman, don't get me wrong on that, but with their wealth and their tactics, were they a robber baron? Okay, these are extremely wealthy businessmen in the late 1800s, early 1900s, who were ruthless in their pursuit of wealth and interested in amassing a large personal fortune. There basically is a competition to see who can gather the largest fortune. Okay, names like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, two that I will go over specifically today. Cornelius Vanderbilt is an early robber baron / captain of industry that I talked about with the railroads last class period. We'll talk about J.P. Morgan, whose company still exists. Henry Ford is another one that you might consider to be a robber baron or captain of industry. Now, captains of industry, in contrast to the robber barons, it could be the same people, you just have to decide which way to categorize them. Captains of industry were extremely wealthy businessmen who used their wealth to better the country through production or charitable means. What that means is either the product improved the country or through their personal fortune that they gave away in charity? Did they help improve the country enough to overcome their shortcomings of their workers, so on and so forth? Okay, so you be the judge on that one. And you'll look at a few examples here just in a couple of minutes, as well as in the items that I have for you that are associated with this lesson. So, in business strategies, the way these guys amassed a large personal fortune and also created a large business empire was through one of two methods. Okay, the first method is called horizontal integration. Back whenever this was an EOC class for high school students, this used to be on the EOC, so this is something I expect you to know moving forward, and it will be a question that is on your test, so I can tell you that right off the bat. Horizontal integration is where you buy out your competition or you merge with your competition so that there are larger companies and less companies that produce a certain product. Okay, this is used by Standard Oil, who uses something called a trust. Okay, trusts are things that have since been outlawed, or they try to look for these things in order to prevent corruption in business. But a trust basically is where you go to a competitor and you take them over as part of your company, but you say they are still a separate company and have a different board rule over them. You could also establish a trust by going to one of your competitors and saying, if you work with me and we drive out this third person that makes the same product, then we will be able to profit from this together. Okay? That is the method that Standard Oil used, in which they acquired multiple companies, either through buying or buying companies, through mergers, or through agreements with other people, and eventually they're going to control over 90% of the oil market in the United States. Now, two guys that I would like for you to know during this unit that I'm going to be referencing here. The first one on the left, Andrew Carnegie. I'll come back to him here in just a second. The other one is John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller owned Standard Oil. Okay, and parts of Standard Oil are still around to this day. If you've ever heard of Amoco, that merged off, and that's a gas station that's around here in the Midwest. That is a company that merged off or split off of Standard Oil. Okay, now Rockefeller's personal fortune, whenever he died in the 1930s, was $1.4 billion, which may not seem like a lot, but when you adjust that for inflation, he was worth $418 billion. And again, that is larger than the three richest men in the world combined to this day. Okay, Andrew Carnegie, his personal fortune was a measly $475 million back in, whenever he died, I believe in 1917. Okay, and he is worth $11.8 billion today, in today's money, if you adjust that for inflation. So, anyway, back to the types of integration. With vertical integration, this is what Andrew Carnegie utilized in order to build his steel empire. Okay, vertical integration includes businesses that produce something that they buy the suppliers, they buy shipping companies, and they buy distributors to maximize profits. Okay, in other words, like I said, this is used by Carnegie Steel. You might think of Amazon as somebody that does this. They produce their own products in some cases, whether it be clothes or electronic goods or various other things. And then they also own the shipping companies now. And they now have Amazon stores where you can go in and buy these things from. Okay, now another example of this, a little more local in a place that I hold near and dear to my heart, unfortunately, is Braum's. Okay, Braum's restaurants, they produce a lot of their own milk and milk products, as you know, along with their beef. They own the trucking company that takes that to those restaurants, and they also, of course, own the storefronts and utilize those to maximize their profits. Okay, they're a little more moral than these other companies. But anyway, now, social Darwinism is something that both of these men practiced, and both of these companies practiced, as well as other businessmen. Okay, in order to accomplish their business things with social Darwinism, they practiced this theory that was a basis off of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. Within Darwin's theory of evolution, he stated that some species flourish and pass on traits to the next generation. Other species that are viewed as inferior are weeded out through natural selection in order for those superior ones to survive. Okay, a guy by the name of Herbert Spencer, who is an economist, I believe, used that theory of social Darwinism, or came up with the theory of social Darwinism, I should say, to explain that society and business are much like Darwin's theory of evolution. especially in laissez-faire economics, in which the government does not interfere at all with businesses. Okay, now, those businesses that are uninterfered with by the government, they basically had free reign of the country. And what they could do whatever they wanted to their workers, they could acquire anything they wanted. They went unregulated and uninvestigated by Congress. Okay? Those businesses that adapted and changed over time survived. The other ones who refused to do that did not, and they were acquired by the larger ones. Okay, there's a new definition of success in the United States as well at this point in time. It used to be that you were very successful if you had over $1,000 and your family owned pieces of land. In the aftermath of the Civil War, there were about 4,000 new millionaires that come about as a result of industry. Okay, social Darwinism, with these people, supported another theory that the poor were lazy and or inferior. Therefore, these rich millionaires were blessed by God and superior in society. Okay, some people took that a step further and said that if you were blessed with this amount of wealth, you should pass on that wealth to those who are less fortunate, which is actually a direct, not quote, but a direct idea from Andrew Carnegie's social gospel. Or not social gospel, my bad. The gospel of wealth. I apologize for that. The gospel of wealth. So, that was a book that Andrew Carnegie wrote in which he said the wealthy need to donate to charity. Okay, so I will explain more about that here in a few minutes. But with growth and consolidation in this business environment, John D. Rockefeller looked for mergers to grow Standard Oil, his company. Okay, and this company began in 1859. And he had acquired, it was, I believe, $4,000, which was the equivalent of about $119,000 today, in starting this company, and the company grew from there. Okay, so he establishes a trust, which is an organizational structure that gave control over several business firms, usually in the same industry, such as the oil industry, to a single board of trustees with the purpose of monopolizing a market. Now, as I mentioned before, those are not legal. They establish a monopoly in which other people cannot control the market or do not have a share of the market. And at that point in time, each of Rockefeller's companies and those that he worked with controlled about 90% of all oil refineries in the United States. He could basically set the price of oil for whatever he wanted. Okay. Now, Andrew Carnegie, on the other hand, is going to acquire resources and transportation for Carnegie Steel to lower costs and maximize profits. Okay, this is considered to be a little more moral than establishing or than using trusts to acquire companies and taking out your competition. Through this, you just maximize, how much you spend on certain things, such as getting, and what Carnegie would do, I apologize, what Carnegie would do is he owned the refineries, or owned the mines, let me back up further there, he owned the mines in which you would get materials from to make steel. He owned the refineries that made steel. He owned the railroads and the trains that took the steel from the mills to their points of distribution, and he also owned the points of distribution in which people would go in and buy steel from. Okay, so the one downfall to this is Carnegie paid his workers very little in a very dangerous job. Okay, now he's going to leave his labor negotiations to an associate, a guy named Henry Clay Frick, so that way Carnegie is not going to look like a ruthless robber baron. Carnegie did not really want to get his hands dirty on this. He had worked his way up as a poor immigrant and had gained a lot of respect in the United States, and he did not want to be seen as somebody that has to stand up against workers. Okay, so this all comes to a head at a place just outside of Pittsburgh called Homestead. Homestead had a very large Carnegie steel producing mill, and at this mill they had some workers get killed. People refused to work unless they had better working conditions and wages. They organized as a labor union, and they went on strike. And Frick said that if they had called off the strike, then there would be no harm, no foul. But if they continued to strike, then he would fire the workers. Well, the workers wound up occupying the mill and locking out the folks from Carnegie that were coming in to try to break up the strike. So Frick decides he's going to call in some force. And he hires a group called the Pinkerton Detectives in order to break up this strike. Now, the Pinkerton Detectives were a private police organization. They at one point in time had guarded Abraham Lincoln during the war, or during the Civil War. Okay, and this is before the U.S. Secret Service. But they're a very powerful organization, and they're equipped with rifles. They are called in to break up the strike. The workers begin throwing rocks at the Pinkerton detectives as they try to break up the strike and open up the plant so that way Carnegie's folks can get back in there and kick the workers out. In the process of this, some Pinkerton detectives are killed, and a number escapes me on this one, but the Pinkerton detectives themselves wind up shooting and killing 7 employees. They wounded 11. That's going to harm Carnegie's reputation. He is away on vacation whenever this takes place, and he realizes, yeah, we've kind of messed up on this one. Frick actually, somebody tried to assassinate him, and Frick was able to fend off the assassin and remain alive and in charge of Carnegie's workforce. But Carnegie felt a burden for doing this to his workers for the rest of his life and began giving away parts of his fortune, trying to make amends with this. Okay, so another guy who you need to know really quick is a guy named J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan Investments and Banking still exists. Okay, J.P. Morgan, the man, originally got wealthy by using banks and various, I guess, trading tactics and mergers in order to combine several firms and turn them around for profit and sell them. Okay, he actually gathers enough investments to buy Carnegie Steel off of Andrew Carnegie in 1900. Andrew Carnegie is up towards the end of his life here, and I believe he's 67, 68 years old, something like that, right around 1900. And he is willing to sell to J.P. Morgan for the astounding price of, I want to say it was $400 million, okay, which is several billion dollars in today's money. But anyway, like I said, J.P. Morgan became noteworthy not only for buying Carnegie Steel, but he became wealthy from trading and acquiring various businesses in oil, the railroad, and steel. But his personal fortune, J.P. Morgan's personal fortune, was measly $1.2 billion, which led John D. Rockefeller to quip that he is not a rich man. Okay, so that kind of gives you a little bit of insight to Rockefeller's personality. Now, I will say each of these guys that I've talked about today did contribute to multiple charitable causes. Okay, I don't have any specific examples from J.P. Morgan, even though his company still exists today. Andrew Carnegie, however, I do have plenty of. This is Carnegie Hall in New York City, one of the premier concert venues in the world. Okay, this is built in the 1890s and is very beautiful on the inside, but he builds this and donates it to the people of New York. So that way they would have a place to go for popular entertainment. Now, while it became essentially a rich man's playground, as well as he owned something called the South Fork River Club, which actually had a dam collapse and killed several hundred people, Carnegie went with a little safer route later on in his life. He is going to found over 2,000 libraries throughout the United States. 3 of them are here in Jasper County. Now, Newton County, for you folks that are taking this class through Crowder, Newton County did not have any Carnegie libraries within, neither did McDonald County, and then to our east, I do know of one over at Aurora that is over there in that direction, but as far as Jasper County goes, Jasper County alone gets $90,000. And they had to pass some bonds as well here in Jasper County in order to get these libraries. But through grants from the Carnegie Foundation, Jasper County alone is going to get $40,000 to build the first library in Joplin, which is still downtown and standing. It is no longer a library, but you can see the picture of that there. Webb City's library, which is still in use, gets a $25,000 donation. And Carthage's library, which I want to say is used for something else now, but I cannot remember. It is still standing as well. They get another $25,000 grant from the Carnegie Foundation. Okay, Carnegie is going to essentially donate $350 million to the public within his lifetime. Okay, Rockefeller, who outlives Carnegie by 20 years, is going to donate $500 million. With investments, and I could not find this for the Carnegie Foundation, even though they still exist, and multiple foundations, I should say. The website I just was on had at least a dozen of them. But with Rockefeller's family, he still had living family, one of his descendants became Vice President of the United States under Gerald Ford. But with Rockefeller's investments and through his family's donations, their philanthropy now totals over $2 billion just in charitable contributions. Okay, some of those charitable contributions are the University of Chicago, which was instrumental in actually developing the atomic bomb during World War II. That was founded with a donation from Rockefeller while he was alive. Rockefeller's family, I do believe, donated the land in which the United Nations building is on in New York City. So these guys did use their personal wealth for various things in order to try to help the people. Now, I mentioned Carnegie chose libraries. The reason why he did that, like I said, a little safer than some of his wealthier things that he contributed to, such as the South Fork River Club, but he wanted to spread education and donate to those less fortunate. That way they would have an opportunity to rise up as he did, because like I said, he was a very poor immigrant to the United States from, I believe, Scotland. And once he gets here, he works his way up because he had memorized how to build furnaces the same way they did in the steel refining process as over in Europe. So that is going to conclude our lecture here on the robber barons and captains of industry.